Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have Ewan on from Byte Studios, the developer of Bloodreaver. It is not out yet, but there is a demo on Steam, yes? itch.io?
Demo's on itch right now,
Okay.
available through our Discord, but we are listed on Steam for wishlist at the minute.
Okay, awesome. This was probably one of my top picks for the AvCon games. One thing I really hope AvCon does one year is have like some sort of indie games room competition where they get people to like vote on like the best game. I think that would just be like a cool thing they could do, but I think this was definitely one of my top picks. It's hard to decide on my favorite because there were a lot of really good games there this year, but look, for me, it's just kind of the style I like, right? That's the thing.
Mm.
I really like what this game has going on. So before we get like way into that, how about you explain who you are, what your position in the studio is, and then get into like what the game itself is?
Sure. So my name's Ewan Wynne Jones, and I'm the director at Byte Studios. But as a small team, I'm also the UI designer. I have a good hand in level design. I'm the producer for the team as well. So yeah, we all do lots and lots of different things within the team. Myself, yeah, we're a 12-person team based here in Adelaide, SA. And yeah, working on our first major title, which is Bloodreaver.
That's a really big studio for like a
It
first
is.
title.
Yeah, no. So we originally, we all studied together. The whole team did, just in different disciplines. And we worked on this throughout sort of our last year of studying. And we got to the end. We had an amazing prototype, and we were like, you know what? Let's not let this go to waste. We already know what our market sort of potential and niche is. Let's form a studio and let's try to do this for real.
Wow. So what is the like breakdown of skills in the team?
So I've got 5 artists,
Mm-hmm.
a tech artist, 2 character artists, and 2 environment artists. And
Okay.
we've got 3 programmers who are all different, are good at different things, you could say. And then we've got 4 designers, which include myself, Matt, our level designer, Jackson, our sort of like creative lead, who's my co-founder in the studio as well. And then we've got Aiden, who's sort of systems design and quality assurance and all the jazz that comes with that.
I can definitely tell that you guys have like artists on the team. Like that's very clear from what I can see in the trailer, from what I saw from actually getting to play the game. Is this running at why is it running at 480p? No, run at something that's sensible. I could definitely tell that like you guys had a clear style in mind with what the game was. Like, it I always like to say that nowadays game like graphical fidelity doesn't really matter. What's way more important is having an art style, having a design that you want to have for your game and actually sticking to that design, because that can be incredibly difficult. And
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
whilst I did mention before we started recording the animations, which do need work, and we'll get more into that afterwards, I do think that the core for a really cool looking game, especially the environments look really good. I think that is definitely already there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like with what we wanted to do when we set out, we were like, let's have that sort of dark fantasy gothic aesthetic, really drawing from inspirations like Bloodborne, as sort of that core inspiration there, and then bringing that into sort of your classic round-based shooter mechanics, kind of like much more like COD Zombies. Yeah. So blending those things together to create, what we like to think is pretty cool. Yeah.
So you guys, you said that you guys all came from like different like backgrounds.
Yeah.
What were you actually studying when you were in uni then?
So I was a design student alongside the 4 other designers on the team. The course that we went to had the different disciplines, so they had programmers, designers, artists,
Okay.
sort of thing. So we all came together and decided to work together, just out of a mutual love of dark fantasy, the occult, and wave shooters. Really,
Okay.
yeah.
So for anyone just listening, like explain the core game loop that exists, because I had the trailer playing on screen, but I do have a lot of people that just listen to this in their
Yeah,
car and
of
whatever
course.
as well.
So at its core, Bloodreaver is just a dark fantasy wave-based first-person shooter. If you've played anything like COD Zombies before, you'll understand the core mechanics of the game really, really quickly. But then what we think we're doing on top of that is bringing in a more sort of like Bioshock-style combat system where you've got abilities and weapons, and blending that all together with a Bloodborne art style. But now we're actually sort of moving into a more painterly aesthetic as well, which is drawing inspiration from something like Dishonored.
Okay. Because the first thing that I saw when I saw the art style, and I know that you mentioned people saw this as well, is like Doom and things like that.
Mm,
Because it does definitely have that, like, demons, blood, all that. It's got
yeah.
that, like, Doom sort of aesthetic to it. And I do remember you mentioning that this is one of the issues you had with people understanding what the game was.
Yeah. Yeah, so we recently put out a trailer through IGN and our publisher. We were in a little showcase with them, and a lot of the feedback we were getting is like, "Oh, this looks like a boomer shooter." And as somebody that made the trailers myself, I realize now, like, just from doing this more and more, curating the type of content that you end up showing to really sort of show our wave-based shooter mechanics, which in reflection, I didn't really do enough of previously. But at its core, Bloodreaver is a wave-based shooter. Yeah.
I think the one thing that did cause that issue is in the trailer, there's no, like, UI, so you don't see the
Yeah, I know.
wave in the corner.
Absolutely. Yeah, like definitely including interface related things in a trailer like that so people can really understand what that looks like is so important. And I'd only made one trailer before this, which is I imagine what you've seen. So yeah, just incremental learning, take every lesson you can and do better next time.
Mm-hmm. So when you say, like, inspiration from COD Zombies, that has a lot of different meanings now because it has changed a lot since World at War. Like, World at War Black Ops, that was that's very much like the initial start of it, and that had a clear continuation of the style. World at War was a lot more simple, the maps were simpler, but when you went into Black Ops, you understood what was going on there. Then Black Ops 2, that had it had the same core mechanics, but it had a lot more, I guess, in depth in the map. Like, I remember back when Black Ops 2 Zombies first launched and people were trying to work out, like, how does the bus work? How do we actually go between the different areas? What can we do in these different areas? There are these things that we seem like we can activate, but how does that actually work? And I don't even know what Zombies is like in the more recent games. I stopped playing back then. But from what point in the sort of Zombies sort of thing is it pulling inspiration from?
So we've really sort of like looked at all the zombies releases in the past couple of years and seen a bit of a dissatisfaction in what some people in the community are really saying about what they don't like about the way that Treyarch's sort of been taking the franchise. And we've been really trying to hone in on the features that people really loved 5, 6, 7 years ago in something like Black Ops 3 and 4, and drawing the best stuff out of that to sort of extract that out and work that into our own systems. But at the same time, there definitely is some newer systems in the more later releases that we're picking certain pieces from, and then blending into our own stuff. Yeah, but like Black Ops 3 and 2, definitely where the sort of core inspiration comes from for the core gameplay.
Okay, that's cool. Like, I do really like this. I always liked doing zombies. I never was someone who played it really extensively. I know there are people who, had spent hundreds or thousands of hours trying to, like, piece out, like, the individual parts of each individual map, like how these different things, like, fit together and where the perfect routes to take things are. From the experience I got to play of Bloodreaver, like, I only got to, like, the first 6 rounds, I think, something like that. Like, to be fair, like, it was a combination of 2 things. 1, I'm terrible at FPS games. 2, I have no idea what was going on with the mouse settings on that game.
Oh,
It was a little bit, whoever set it up perfectly for them.
Yeah.
But even so, like, it was a really fun experience getting to play that game, because I haven't really touched that. As I said, I haven't really touched that since, like, Black Ops 2. So I saw the game, like, when I was walking around Avcon, I thought initially I was going to be like some sort of boomer shooter, because that's what it looked like from the movement, especially the movement, because that's one of the big differences between what you're doing and what, like, Zombies is and things like that. The movement that you have is a lot more reminiscent of things like Doom. It's a lot faster. You're not just a dude who's just, like, slowly walking around. Like, you actually can just, like, zip around the map. So it gave me that feel first, but the second I sat down and I saw that round number, I was like, okay. And I saw like the little currency counter you have in the corner, like, okay, I know exactly what this is. I've done
Yeah,
this
yeah.
before.
People who have played similar games like COD Zombies seem to get it straight away, and
Mhm.
they love it. Like we had some people over the weekend of AFCON being like, "I love what you guys are doing with this. Like this does everything that the newer Call of Duty Zombies aren't really doing, and you're bringing back to those nostalgic features, and that's a big win for us to have somebody that's involved in that community say we're doing the right things.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. So I understand like what the art style for the game is, but why this sort of art style? Like, why did you want to go for this like gothic, Doom, Dishonored, Bloodborne style look to it?
Well, I think for us, we sort of looked at what else is out there in the market. You got games like Killing Floor, Warhammer Vermintide, COD Zombies, of course, as
Mhm.
well, in that wave shooter sort of genre. And there wasn't really anything that had specifically drawn from like demonic dark fantasy. I think in the way that we're trying to do, they're almost semi-medieval fantasies to a certain degree,
Mhm.
with sort of tech in woven into that as well. So
Mhm.
we wanted to sort of differentiate from other games to really create a core universe that people could identify as unique
Mhm.
and really get behind. I think is sort of the core reason there.
Mhm. Okay. Well, why why actually wanting why did you want to go and make a zombie style game in the first place? Because there's so many other kind, like, even just in the FPS genre. Like, I know you said that the modern zombies games don't really, or modern zombies modes don't really fill the void that people want from it. But I assume that you had a lot of experience playing that, and other members of the team probably had experience
Hmm.
playing with that growing up, and maybe I assume don't like what's going on with the modern games.
So this is where having my co-founder here would be amazing. Jackson,
Mm-mm.
he was the core inspiration
Okay.
for Bloodreaver at the crux of it, where he sort of came to me and was like, "Ewan, you're great at producing teams. I've got this amazing idea. I've identified this niche in the market for the COD Zombies audience. I've got a great idea. Let's try bring that together." So that was really him being a massive fan himself and saying, "You know what? There are problems that I believe us as a team can fix."
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of snowballed from there, really, where
Mm-hmm.
we started building the team and picking out the best people from each discipline and saying, we want you, and you're an amazing level designer, you're on the team now,
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing.
So, what did it look like when it first started? When it was just that like proof of concept?
Mm. Funnily, when we first started, there was a whole divergent version of the game where we were originally concepting, where it was all about Norse gods and
Okay.
mythology. And then there was like, I think, high tech semi fantasy elements in some sort of the level design. And we were going to set it in Scandinavian Europe. And
Okay.
after a few days of this, I sort of was like, I think we got a couple too many references. And as a team, we sort of sat down and go, oh, let's pick
Mm-hmm.
one of these, and then Demons sort of came out too. Yeah.
Okay.
So we went around with a lot of different ideas, and then sort of picked the best and found the ones that gelled most well together, and
Mm-hmm.
then cut the stuff that didn't feel like we had the breadth at the time to really investigate and do justice.
Mm. Well, it's not like those ideas are necessarily bad, and maybe, if you want to do something further in the future, you could certainly build off of. Like, I do think like something Norse inspired actually would be really, really cool. Like, I get like the whole demons thing and all that. That's really cool, but I definitely cannot, like, Killing Floor at least has that sort of inspiration in a sense.
Mm.
Going completely outside of zombies and demons and trying something entirely different. I don't know. It could work if you had
It
like the
definitely
ideas
could.
that could fit with it.
It's something that we found recently when we were ideating on some of the new demons that we're working on. It's
Mm,
like for the core horde, more specifically, it's like
mm,
how do you create an enemy type visually that can move slowly
mm,
and then can also move really fast, but it doesn't look like from any point that it's holding its power back.
mm.
So how do you design some kind of humanoid that is either restricted or is super powerful that doesn't really it doesn't feel like when they're attacking you that like they're being held back by anything. And so
Right.
demons and the way that we've started concepting demons now, which is sort of more I guess like tortured, undead, um, like possessed, you could
Mm.
say. Sort of fills that void. Well, with zombies, they can do that really well, where the limbs are missing, heads are off and whatnot, and they look like their legs are broken, so they sort of walk slowly.
Mm.
Trying to find a way that we could do that with demons as well was actually such a design challenge, and we
Mm.
worked really hard with our concept artist to sort of come up with a motif for what we're moving to now that allows us to do that and really have that wave evolution to make you feel
Mm.
like these demons are becoming more powerful and they're unleashing their full potential on you.
Mm. Mm.
So
What actually goes into like designing the enemies for something like this? Because obviously I only saw probably like the first two enemy
mm,
types. I saw the regular horde sort of demons and then the big dudes who slap you and then you die.
yeah.
But what else is present in the game at this point, and sort of like what really goes into concepting something like this?
So, in terms of designing a demon, something that we really considered first is like, again, the universe that they exist in. How do these demons come to be? Why are they the way they are? And that sort of informs all of your initial referencing for how
Mm-hmm.
you construct them. So we sort of went away and did a bunch of world building and came up with the answers for those questions. Um, and then started to push again, like what I just mentioned about how do you have consistent wave evolution that feels right to the player, identifying sort of body proportions, sort of style of decay or body, the word gore, for example. And then we sort of bring all of those references together in a bank that we give off to an artist alongside a brief of saying this enemy needs to do X, Y, and Z. We then go through like an initial round of concepting where they just put out a load of ideas with drastically different sort of interpretations of the references. And then from there, we sort of pick out a few pieces. Oh, we really like this head design. That piece of how you've drawn that arm is really good. So let's reference that again. And then you go into stage two, where it's like, okay, we've got the style established. Now let's find the one that we're going to do a turnaround of. So you get front, side, back perspectives done. And yeah, you've got that. And then you do sort of a final color version of a demon that then gets given to an artist so that they can create in 3D and realize.
Right.
Yeah, so it's quite a long process from concept to in the game gold standard,
Mm-hmm.
especially for an enemy like this, sort of like our core horde enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Takes a few months to say the least. And as one of the ones we're building on top of our pipeline at the minute as well, there's always back and forth and establishing things for the future. Yeah, definitely takes a good amount of time.
With the regular horde enemy, are they just like the same enemy, or is there some variation between them?
So it's interesting in the version that you can play on it right now.
Mm-hmm.
The base mesh, the base body of the demons are the same,
Sure.
but then their skin tone, their
Right. That's what I was getting
demonic
at. Yeah.
sigils on their bodies, and the horns, the shackles on their wrists and their ankles are all generated at runtime. And it's actually a really good point that you bring this up, because last year when we were working on that version of the demon, I was like, oh, we've got 16 billion possible variations of demon in the game. It's amazing. It's amazing. But in practice, when you actually start playing and you're looking at those demons
Yeah.
over and over, round after round, there actually isn't enough silhouette change that really actually makes somebody go, "Oh, those are unique." So we've completely changed our process now of how we're approaching that. Where instead of generating random attachments, you could say, onto demons when they spawn, it's now we're sort of working towards a set of while similar, bespokely unique like base horde enemies.
Mm-hmm.
So one might have a completely different head, completely different set of like spikes and dismemberment sort of qualities about them, but across the board they're all still of the same class of demon, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think of
So
a
the
game.
process becomes more involved.
Because I think of a game like Dynasty Warriors, for example. Like you're swinging through hundreds of enemies. Like, you know, it's not a super important detail because you're gonna sort of forget what they look like relatively quickly. But if everything that's running at you looks like a copy paste of the exact same model, it just ends up looking cheaper.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's something that we've noticed, and we're working really hard behind the scenes to make sure that the base horde is bespokely different and unique across the sort of board. So it's I'll reference it this way as well. Like COD Zombies, for example, they've got the liberty where they can dress their
Right.
horde in different sets of clothing, but they all sort of look similar, but like next to each other, they are unique. And it's like, how do you do that with a naked demon? And that's something that a design challenge that we've been sort of looking into recently as well. So
Right.
yeah, like I sort of said, completely bespoke heads, body types with different levels of sort of like gore and spikes all coming out of them to create the illusion of that sort of like clothes motif again to sort of give that sort of like differentiation between all the base demons.
But I assume also making them similar enough where you can tell that they are the same enemy type, and you're not worrying about a new mechanic that is going to
Absolutely,
be,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's such a design challenge to do that, to not push it too far at the same time as well. Because we've got a new enemy type that we're actually working on right now called the bloater, which basically is a lesser demon, the base horde enemy, but then they've got like huge growths all over the side of their body. And that is bespokely different from any of the others to indicate that that has additional mechanics to fight against you with.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because it's easy enough to distinguish when there's like a size difference, you know, the regular ones and the big
Mm.
ones, but
Yeah.
when it's a more subtle one like that, I could certainly see there being a lot of discussions around how should this be designed to make it actually clear to the player, because that's, you don't want the player to feel like what happened just now was unfair, where they just couldn't tell that there was an enemy that was different.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's definitely a big design challenge in lots of different areas of game development, but having a roster of enemies that you can clearly identify through silhouette that they have different functions is so important. And again,
Right.
we're working with our team and our concept artists to make sure that that is really clearly identifiable from all sorts of different levels of distance.
One thing you mentioned in there was dismemberment. Like,
Mm.
is that in the game right now? What's the plan around dismemberment? Because that,
So with the itch version, again, that was sort of made, I don't know if we mentioned it before, but that was made over 4 months as like a proof of concept itch, I guess, to
how
sort of like
different is the
show our
itch
core
version
mechanics.
to what was shown at AvCon, or is that the
That
same
is the
version?
same. That is the
Okay.
same version. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
you've seen that version of the game. Now internally, now we're working on sort of like multiplayer and everything, and all these new demons. So that version is a bit further ahead, but we're waiting for a couple more months before we show anything off there. Going back to what you said before, just remind me.
Yes.
What was the
Oh,
original question
dismemberment.
before I went on? Dismemberment.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in the itch version right now, there's no dismemberment, but yeah, in the version we're working on now, there will be at least partial dismemberment of the demons. Yeah.
Do you want to say like what that's going to indicate gameplay wise, or is it just going to be a visual thing?
It'll be there are mechanics around why you might dismember a demon from the waist down, for example.
Right.
Again, if you've played something like zombies, there's the tactic of creating a crawler to allow you to move around the map and not have to worry about zombies. So that's definitely something we're looking into, and also like for special enemies, dismembering certain limbs to knock off a bespoke weapon that they might be using against you as well. So yeah, we're developing, as Doom coined it, the destructible demon system of our own. So we're looking into that, yeah.
Right. I think of something like Dead Space, for example. Obviously a much slower game, but dismemberment is like a very core part of dealing with encounters in that.
Definitely.
So
Yeah, no, just all of that stuff from a development standpoint is it like adds so many elements onto the pipeline of how you create enemies. But with a game like this, your enemies and how you defeat them are part of the core concept of the game. So we really are pushing towards making that as tight as possible.
Right, because it's fundamentally a relatively simple game loop. Like, as soon as you work out how to play the game, like, these games all turn into the same idea, which is you run around in the circle, you get the zombies to chase you, the demons to chase you, and then you shoot them down. Like, there's obviously different demons that are going to come in later, but that's like the core fundamental way that it all goes down. So having some way to break that up, having like exciting things that happen to the demons like dismemberment, definitely breaks that up. And you don't want it, you want to have a core game loop. You don't want it to feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over again.
No, absolutely, and I think that's where for us, our ability system, our blood magic combat
We
system
didn't actually
really
get into
sort of
that yet, did
can
we?
shine. Where you've got drastically different ways to deal with demons. You've got now in the game, not in the itch build, but ultimate abilities where you sort of charge those over time by defeating more demons, and then you've got a whole different way to sort of take them down.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So I think we're definitely aware of that problem. Like especially high round gameplay in similar games, it's like, oh, you're just doing the same thing wave after wave, and it's
Right.
like, how do you give the player something to break that up and allow them to sort of have more ways to engage with the enemies as
Right.
opposed to just I shoot this guy, I run away, I shoot him again.
Right. A high wave is something. I think we might have talked about it at Avcon as well. Like that is like at some point you've introduced all of the enemies you're going to introduce. You've unlocked the entire map. You've found all the weapons. You've got the upgraded versions of the weapons. Like at that point, what do you do to keep someone wanting to play it, or do you even want to keep someone playing it at that point, or is there like a point where you're like, okay, you can keep going, but we've effectively decided that this is the end?
So we've actually got two things that we're working on for that. So,
Mhm.
like some of the more recent zombies entries, they started to include an exfiltration system where you can choose to leave the game and end your run at a certain point for a point value. That is something that we're including as options for players. You know, that's, you say you do all the things you want in the map, you can choose to leave.
Mhm.
But also with a discoverable narrative, that also offers a canon ending at the end of each Easter egg, you could say,
Mhm. Mhm.
for leaving the map in the good ending, you could say, of each map.
Mhm. Mhm.
So we're offering players sort of multiple ways to complete all of their not quite objectives, but their personal goals within the run, and then leave at certain points.
Mhm. Mhm. So with that map that was available for the Avcon build, the HIO build, how big was that map? Because I saw like 3 different rooms before dying,
Mhm.
but I did notice there were a couple of doors that I hadn't opened yet.
So in that particular map, it's the beginning of the end. It's one of the maps that will be available in early access,
Mhm.
which is actually getting significantly larger internally, which is great. But in that version, as you can play right now, there's a total of 7 or 8 rooms, I believe.
Mhm.
You've got the exterior of the cathedral, you've got the graveyard and the main entry area, the garden, and then you've also got the inside of the cathedral, where a lot of the later round sort of gameplay might take place. So
Mhm.
you've got the actual inner sort of chapel, and then you've got the library to the side.
Is that the one that's shown in the Steam trailer?
I believe so. Yeah, I
Okay.
tried to get all of the areas in that trailer at some point, so you should be able to
Okay.
see the whole map.
Okay. Right. 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 Oh, yep. Yeah. I see. I think this
Yeah.
is. Yeah. This looks like cathedral. Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay.
what we actually tried to do with that as well is design the spaces to push players around the maps at different points.
Mm.
So the cathedral, the chapel itself, is super tight, but then there are gameplay reasons why you have to go in there. We've also placed what we believe is the best weapon in that space,
Hmm.
and the best ability as well. So having to go into there, trap yourself in the area for the ritual. Yeah, like there's reasons to go to all of the spaces at different times. Mm.
One thing we kind of we'll get back to that, but one thing we kind of jumped over was the ability system, the blood magic
Hmm.
system. So, as someone's playing the game, how do they interact with that?
So right now, as the game stands, you've got firing your weapons on
Mhm.
your right hand with the left click of the mouse, and then abilities are on your sort of left click. So left and right click for the two sort of sides of the combat system. How that works though is what we like to call the blood magic economy, where you're shooting demons with your weapons and using your bullets, and that gains you their blood that then you can use your abilities with. And yeah, so it's that constant balance of like using the weapons to power your abilities and then dealing massive damage with said abilities.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people come into this game being like, oh, I'm just going to use the weapons. But we've actually balanced the system so that the weapons damage really falls off as you get later and later into the game to really push players to use your abilities a whole lot more.
Mhm.
And yeah, so like your weapons are your point gainers or your blood gainer, and then the ability is like the big damage dealer
Right.
that you'll have on the other hand.
Yeah, because I noticed that early on, you get to the graveyard. There's the shotgun
Mhm.
there or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Early on, at least, like you can just like fire down hordes, not really think about it. Is there a bonus damage for a headshot? I couldn't tell.
There is, yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So
okay.
you do bonus damage, and I think you get bonus points for headshots on kills as well.
Okay, I was just aiming headshots for everything anyway. Yeah. But yeah, at that point, like first couple of rounds in, like you're just firing things down, and I think at that point you can also grab the sword. Is that
yes, you can.
Okay,
if you're in the graveyard, you can get one of your first two abilities.
So the starting ability, that is just like the little pea shooter blood magic thing.
Yeah, blood knife, I think it's called, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So that's sort of like almost an SMG in your hand that fires out little blades of blood daggers at the enemies.
And then you can grab the sword in the next room, and I guess this sort of leads me into the thing I was saying earlier about like the animations. So you guys have artists on the team, but you don't have animators, and they're not horribly bad, but I can tell that they were not made by an animator.
Yes,
like they serve the function, but
they do. Yeah,
I think the sword the sword is the worst offender in my mind, at least from what I played, because you just like it's this big great sword thing, and I was saying earlier, it kind of feels like slapping them with a pool noodle, and like it's powerful, but it just doesn't feel powerful.
I absolutely agree with you, and it's one of the biggest bits of feedback we've gotten so far, and again, like proof of concept for the base game's features. But yeah, animations are a big thing, and we're looking into bringing on an animator to our team at the moment as well to really get sort of that higher quality that the rest of the game deserves to have. It is definitely something that we're super aware of. We know how they need to look. It's just something as a limitation within any team. Really, you've got areas that you don't have the skills for.
Right.
And it's an area that sorely needs a lot of work. And I can confidently say I think we've got a good solution coming in the newer versions of the game.
There's not much of the sword in the trailer.
Did I not include
no, there is.
I think there's one shot.
It's like there's like 3 seconds, and it's like later in the video. Here it is. Okay, like it's also hard to tell like how far the range of the sword is. Like melee weapons are always going to be a bit weird in a game like this, because you always want to be standing away from the enemies, but then a melee weapon you need to get in close with it, and because of the animations on the enemies as well, it's hard to tell how close you can be without getting hurt.
So that's just all stuff that we will be working very hard on dialing in. The user experience sort of feedback on something like this is so important to make sure people understand when they're going to get hit, if they can move out of the way, and when say a sword swing actually connects with an enemy. And that's where potentially a destructible demon system might come in really handy to really see those sort of attacks connect.
Because when the first thing, because of the art style, people are going to think of, is things like the melee weapons in Doom. Like, you hit someone with it, and it's like, you feel like you hit something with, and not even just that, but, like, the guns as well. I feel like with the guns, there's also a lack of response from the enemies. I don't know if there is any sort of response, but whatever response is there, it's like, yes, you're hitting them, and yes, you can kind of tell you're hitting them, but they're not, like, flinching in any way, or at least any really noticeable way. Do you guys have a sound guy?
So amongst us designers, we've done a lot of the sound ourselves, to varying levels of success, I think. For certain weapons, like the revolver, for example, I worked with Jackson, our co-founder, to sort of bespokely make like all the sort of pullback of the triggers, the shooting sounds, what an actual sort of revolver might have. Some weapons and enemies got more attention than others, I guess, in the time we were developing.
Because it's not just animation that like gives you impact; it's the sound of hitting something as well. Like if you hit someone with a sword, there should be like some sort of clear slashing and cutting and bleeding sound, and you hit someone with a gun, like the gun should have like a really impactful sound, and there should be some sort of like impact to the enemy, and like I'm sure you've thought about all of these things before, but it is definitely for me, like, the major thing about the game. Like, the rest of it, I can clearly tell there is a lot of work that's gone into it, and it's like it's still fairly early on, but it feels quite polished for the state that it's in.
Yeah.
Then held back by like how it feels to hit things, how it feels to interact with things, and like it's sad because that like it's not something you think about straight away when you're playing a game, but it is something that is very noticeable when it's missing.
Yeah. So it's like sound design and animation design are so important, especially in like an FPS game. And it's just unfortunate, I think, in the current state of the team that we don't have anybody that's got the professional experience that we really needed. At least before. We are looking into those solutions now, though, to hopefully bring that quality up. And we're fully aware of this being sort of the weakest part of the game. And yeah, it's something that I can assure you will be being changed heavily in the future.
I did see there was a Reddit post from like one of the times that the trailer was posted where someone pointed this out, and like whoever responded, whoever was on the Reddit account at the time was like, "Yeah, we know. It's still going to be reworked." Oh, it's you.
Yeah. I actually, as I've been mentioning as well, I was talking about the demons before. Both the demons you see in the demo are being entirely reworked. The lesser demon and the chaos demon, the two that are available there, we're actually in full production for their full reworks at the minute. I think from what I showed people over the weekend, because we've got concepts and some 3D stuff coming through the pipeline, people are like, "Oh, you thought they were cool before? Now they're 10 times better."
Okay, that's good to hear. That is really good to hear. Because I thought like I think the lesser demon, like they worked a lot better from what I could tell. Like the bigger ones, I assume those were added later on and maybe didn't have as much polish to it. Yeah.
You can say that again. It's ironic you actually bring that up because when we first sort of like had our initial launch build on Itch, the Chaos Demon actually had a magic ranged attack where it would fire like magic sigil circles in a predictive manner, sort of under the player's feet, where it would predict where you were running to and then fire them right under you. And we found that without fail, every fifth round, players were dying because it was so hard, and the feedback on it just wasn't there whatsoever. So we actually, in about 3 or 4 days, stripped that out and re-added its melee attacks. But even still, like just adding a bigger enemy that has a bit more of a range wasn't that interesting. And we're currently concepting the new mechanics for that enemy, and I can tell you now that they're looking pretty cool behind the scene.
Well, one of the things that is obviously going to be something you have to design around is the speed of the player, because it's one thing to just, you know, if you're walking around with like in zombies, you can design them to walk at the speed of a person. You're not moving at the speed of a person this one, you're moving at the speed of like I don't know if it's as fast as in Doom, but it's fairly close. And if you don't have some way to counter that with the enemies, as no matter what sort of enemies you add, you can just run away from them and be halfway across the screen within like 2 steps. It doesn't really matter what's done there. So I assume there's some design being done around that as well.
Oh, definitely. Around the movement right now, we're really dialing that in. I think a lot of us internally in the team are like, "Oh, it's probably a little bit too fast for the type of game that it is right now." So yeah, there's definitely a lot of consideration going into that. And of course, with enemy types being able to slow the player down, potentially environmental hazards doing the same as well. Yeah, we're definitely cooking on a bunch of that stuff.
Well, I would think it'd also be interesting to have enemies that are close to the speed of the player, or maybe do like charges at the player, so the speed actually does matter to get away from them in those cases.
You know, it's great to hear you saying this because it reaffirms that things we're working on, people are interested in, and people are like, "Oh, naturally that might work for the game," and it's like, well, just you wait and see.
Because again, I think of games like Doom, and they have similar things, or Left 4 Dead, which have their big bulky charger dudes. But in that game, you are like fairly slow, so getting away from them is like a big challenge. But no, absolutely. Like I'm very glad to hear that you guys are thinking of the same sort of ideas here, and you have been, I guess, listening to a lot of the player feedback and sort of building around that. How do you find yourself going through player feedback? Because I can speak from my perspective of doing YouTube stuff.
Mhm.
There are people who are going to tell you things that directly conflict with what other people tell you, where you're like, okay, you both cannot be right because you are saying opposite things.
Mm. So I think something that a lot of us designers learned while we were studying is that all feedback is not weighted equally,
Mhm.
and at times you need to see a bunch of feedback and then actually just pick out what's useful out of it. So somebody might go, "Oh, the game's bad," and like, cool, that's your opinion. That's not necessarily useful feedback. Or I really love this feature about this thing, and they go into minute detail about oh, maybe you tweak this feature to be a little more like this. That's good feedback. That's something you maybe write down and then reflect on later once you've had other people sort of give similar feedback. Yeah, it's definitely a thing you learn as a developer and I assume as a content creator as well, is that
Mhm.
all feedback is not necessarily made equal,
Yeah.
and you've got to sift through it all, like yeah, to get the best stuff out of it.
Mhm.
But in terms of feedback as well, something that we actually have working with us is our publisher. They have external feedback agencies where they can sort of give out the game to people that it's their job to give feedback on game features and whatnot. So we've had a few rounds of that so far, and the things that come out of that are really, really useful because they're employed people that it's their job doing that sort of stuff. But a lot of it that we're actually getting back is stuff we're already working on, which again just reaffirms a lot of the time that we're internally moving in the right direction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, what was the feedback like from Avcon? Like, I I did see there was some people in there that were getting relatively high rounds, that experience with these kinds of games, but I assume you also would have had people who it was their first time trying a game like this, who didn't
Mhm.
really know what to expect. And those people are the interesting ones because they're going to interact with it in a way that might be unexpected. If you've played a game like Zombies, you know, okay, I kill these, I have this money in the corner, I can go buy a weapon on the wall here, I can unlock a door like this. But what about those people who just didn't know what they were getting into?
So I think with people, I guess you could consider them your secondary audience, if you
Mm.
will. Once they sort of sit down and play for a few seconds, they get attacked by a few demons, and they're like, "Oh, my screen's going red. I'm probably getting damaged." They start to realize and learn pretty quickly from what we found that you need to shoot demons, and then just the way that the sort of user interface is displayed, you've got that counter on the side of the screen with bright yellow numbers going up. Um, yeah, for people that haven't played before, it can be a few rounds worth of learning, and we sort of account for that in the game's balance. Gradually increasing the sort of difficulty from waves 1 to sort of 3 are here's your time to really just mess around and try learn the mechanics with very slow moving demons.
Mhm.
But yeah, it sort of really ramps up at round 4. And then round 5, you have your first boss round, which, as we sort of coined internally in the team, separates the boys from the men. So the Chaos Demon tends to be the thing that really kills people the first time round. But
I
one
kept
thing we
standing in
actually,
that really thin alleyway.
yeah,
I don't know why I
yeah,
was there. I could be anywhere else besides there.
one thing we really noticed from Avcon was that if people did die at the Chaos Demon, they were like, "Can I play again
Mhm.
and try to be better?" So it's sort of that game that inspires you to sort of, "Oh, I died, great, cool,
Mhm.
but I want to try again. I want to beat that enemy, or I want to get to that next round and see that next
Mhm.
area, for example." But absolutely, as you're sort of saying, of like new player experience, a tutorial can be super important in a game
Mhm.
like this. I think as a new IP, especially, it's something that we'll absolutely look into later in development. Naturally, you do that towards the end
Right, right.
of your cycle. But yeah, it's the new player experience is really really vital, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's I, with a game like this, it's not you don't really need that much of a tutorial because the core, as I said, the core loop is fairly simple. But at least, I guess introducing players to how the like purchasing system works. It can be
Mhm.
if you haven't played a game like this, it might be kind of counterintuitive that you get a weapon from the wall. Like
Yeah,
why are there weapons on the wall? Like that like okay, that's
mm.
weird. Or like
Yeah,
introduce
no,
or in like
yeah,
work how the revive works because I got it straight
yes.
away because there's like some other games that have done similar things, but
Mhm.
you die and then it's like, why is everything blue? Like I thought it was over. Like what do I
Yeah,
do
yeah.
now?
So I think with the revival mechanics as they sort of are in the game right now, that was a bit of a cop out on our end to have a full revival system, given that the game's single player.
Mhm,
We obviously will, with multiplayer coming in, have a proper down state and players sort of running back to each other and reviving each
mhm,
other. But being a single player experience to start with, we needed to come up with a way that people could keep playing,
mhm,
and having sort of like an undead mode where you run back to your body seems the most appropriate for the type of game we have right now.
mhm.
That whole mechanic, though, is becoming something map specific in one of the maps we're working on now, though. So it's not going away, but we are reincorporating it in a different way.
Okay, okay. So at this stage, how many maps are planned for the game?
So in the full release, or I guess I should say our early access release of the game,
Mhm,
we'll be launching with two, and
mhm,
then halfway through early access, our plan is to drop a third.
mhm.
This is exclusive information, I believe, and then the full game will launch with four. Is our current development plan at least.
I think it says the maps on the Steam page actually.
I believe that is out of date now because we've added some more things
Okay,
in.
okay, because
Um,
it says
yeah,
Last Stand, Beginning of the End, and the
the Decipher,
Vassifer. How do you say that?
the Decipher.
The Cipher. I've
Yes,
never seen. What does that mean? What does that? I've never seen that word before.
that is something for the players to discover in the game.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay, I thought it was like some word that already existed. Okay, makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, it is not something that exists. It's
Okay,
something that we have made for the
cool.
universe.
This isn't just me being stupid then. Awesome.
No, not at
That's a
all.
nice change. Okay, so two maps initially, one map later on,
Mhm.
and what is the long term? Obviously, this is going to depend on how the game goes, but what is the
Mhm.
long term support plan for it after early access is done, after the game is ready to ship, whatever what term you want to use for
Mhm.
it? What happens then?
So us as developers, we love this IP already,
Mhm,
and if enough people buy the game, we want to support this game for a long time.
mhm,
Internally already, we have got plans for I guess quarterly DLC, you could say,
mhm,
where we drop a new map, new weapons, new story continuation each quarter,
mhm,
over the course of probably a year and a half. And if that all goes well and people are still loving what we're doing, we'll go for a season two,
mhm.
and then continue on. Yeah. So idealistically, I think by the time the game sort of reaches its sort of like limit, and like sunset period, you could say, we'd love to have 8 or 9 maps in the game,
Okay,
and
and
they are being concepted already. We
right,
are future planning ourselves, so we know where that story might be taking the
right.
players. But yeah, that is a couple of years in the pipeline, you could say.
Do you have a guy whose job is to like keep the story in check, or is that like a thing that everyone's getting involved in?
So, in terms of our narrative team, there is 3 members of the team, all from
Mhm,
the different disciplines. 2 of which have creative writing degrees, and I think one of them, Alf, has written books before, as far as I remember. So yeah, there's a pretty robust narrative team behind things and
mhm.
making sure the story makes sense, and the way we want to sort of push the narrative to the players and let them discover it. I think is being worked on pretty well from what I understand.
Mhm. So you can be vague here, not to give spoilers, but how is the story going to be told?
I guess how do I say this? The beginning of the end, which is the map that you've played so far,
Mhm,
set on the cathedral. When the full game rolls around, you'll be introduced to 4 characters, um,
mhm.
and
These are mentioned on the
something.
Steam page, I believe.
Yes, I
Yes,
believe so.
Artemis,
They're all named
Saxon,
characters.
Edward, and Ren.
Yes. So you'll be introduced to those characters, who, for whatever reason, happen to do something to reignite an ancient war
Mhm,
and unleash the demons back on the world. And it's their job to sort of discover why that happened and why they can now use blood magic, and follow the story through their eyes.
mhm, mhm. So
And
is
that's
that
all I think I can say on it at the minute.
okay? Well, is it gonna? I'm trying to get something out of you that's not gonna, that you can actually like. Is it gonna be told in a way similar to zombies, where you're gonna do things in the map and it's gonna tell you parts of the story?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
So
okay.
all of the narrative that we will be pushing out to the players is discoverable. So through Easter eggs, through a continuous timeline progressing from map to map.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's all there for the players to discover. There'll be things on walls in the environment that might give you a hint towards something that might not even appear for 3 maps, that sort of thing. We want to
Hmm.
be able to build a universe here and build a connected world that people sort of go, oh my god, I learned this thing in this map down here that now makes something make sense back in the very first map that you might have played 6 months ago, for
Hmm.
example.
Hmm. So so it's going to be a co-op game. Is there
Yes.
going to be some sort of interaction between the characters that are like playing in there then?
So we are currently looking at ways on how we can incorporate voice acting and character speaking to each other to show off more of the narrative. Obviously, with that, it's quite expensive, and
Right.
we're just sort of looking at the best ways to sort of find talent for that at the minute. But there is definitely plans for a narrative system where, for example, Ren might say something to Artemis in response to a location that they're in, for example, that might progress
Hmm.
some personal story.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. I, I'm sure there's a lot of things that you would like to do that are just a matter
Mm.
of funding, time, finding people to do it.
Absolutely. You know, being a small studio, we recognize that, some of our competitors are AAA games with $300 million budgets.
Hmm.
We are not that, unfortunately, and there is only so much we can do, but we're really going to push hard to become a competitor in this genre, you could
Hmm.
say.
Hmm. Hmm.
I
Well,
think just on
go
that
on.
as well, like referencing a game that came out recently, like Skir Ritual, for example, that's
Mhm.
made by a small indie team as well, and they're doing really, really well. So if we can sort of hit similar benchmarks to them, I think we'll be very happy.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, you mentioned that you've already got like a bunch of people who've wishlisted it at this point.
Hmm.
How
Yes, we
many's that
just
so
hit
far? Oh wow.
5,200, I believe, after being on Steam for about 2 months, which is incredible. If any of you guys out there are listening have wishlisted, thank you so much. We love the support. It's amazing to see, a small team of developers, being able to show their work to the world and people actually say, I maybe might buy that, which is really cool.
That is really cool. I'm,
Mm.
I'm sure that you had never expected that sort of response to it.
Oh no, not I guess this early on.
Right.
Definitely that was a big shock. We sort of hit a few thousand in the first month or two, and then we were like, oh wow, this is still going.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just great to really see the sort of numbers that we're starting to pull in,
That is
even so early
awesome.
on.
Like,
Yeah.
when's the game targeted for release or early
So
access?
at the minute, we're looking to launch early access in possibly September next year to line up with Steam Next Fest and PAX. But we'll have sort of Kickstarter and closed beta demos throughout next year.
Mhm.
Is the plan,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
full release onto into 2026
Okay. So
if
it's
everything goes to plan, of course.
that's the biggest issue.
Yeah,
Assuming you don't have some crazy idea, I was like, what if we add this new system that's going to take a little bit of time to do that interacts with every other system?
yeah. So that's really my job within the team. When half of the guys come up with this crazy idea of like, oh, let's add this flying demon that spits out fireballs and throws you across the map, I go, maybe not. Maybe Bloodreaver 2.
Right,
But yeah,
right.
no, that is definitely is conditional on everything going to plan and we're not overscoping and adding too many systems that don't need to be there for now, at least. But we are thinking about the future and how we can get to a release as soon as possible.
Yes, scope creep is always a concern with any project. Doesn't matter if it's a game project, an open
Mhm.
source, I don't know, desktop or anything you want to do. Scope creep, especially when that scope creep gets outside of the initial. Like, it's one thing when you're expanding within the scope of what you're doing and, like, cool things in here. But when you're like, okay, well, what if we add this new system that's way outside the scope?
Yeah.
Well, okay, we've got that now. What if we start expanding off of that? And you can
Yeah.
get to a point where you just never end up releasing something.
So, in terms of scope creep, have you ever heard of Star Citizen?
Hmm. Yeah, What's that? What is the money they brought in? 700 million?
700 million
Yeah,
now.
it's
Yeah, yeah. I've been a follower for a long time, and it's like I've gone from early high school to now working in the games industry before the game's released.
they've released things. There's like
Oh
some.
yeah,
They've got like I think it's like a shooter thing. There's like a ship demo thing. They also have like $48,000 DLC. So you know.
yes. Yeah, like I, as a developer, I love following it. I love seeing it progress, and obviously you can play the game, but the scope creep in sort of that might be written in the annals of history one day
Right.
for one of those games that grew so much.
Well, there are some cool things coming out of that project though. Like I don't know if you've ever seen what they've done with like server meshing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I find it really interesting as a developer.
for anyone who hasn't heard about that, the problem with MMOs is you have different servers, and no one likes different servers. Like, I especially in most traditional MMOs where it's like you have to pay to transfer. I grew up playing RuneScape, so going to something like Final Fantasy 14 and learning that like people pay to go between servers was wild to me. Because in RuneScape you could just click the different world. Like I'm here now, whatever. I want to play in Poland today. I'm playing in Poland today. But the idea with server meshing is, and they didn't come up with the idea, but they've got some crazy stuff they're working on with it. Basically, you have different servers serving different parts of the map, and all of them interact with each other. So if you're in two different parts of the map and you do an attack, for example, that crosses a server boundary, that attack can then still hit an enemy through those different servers. So this allows you to have these giant maps with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of players in them. And theoretically, if it fits together and works, you just have a seamless game.
As the great Todd Howard once said, it just works.
It just works. Yeah.
Nah, in all seriousness, no, like I've been following that project for years. I think it's amazing what they're doing. People joke about scope creep and
Yeah.
$48,000 DLC, but I really genuinely hope it comes out one day because I've always said I'd buy a full HOTAS system to play it, and my team, like I'm the guy in the team that follows Star Citizen, so we talk about it occasionally, and talk about all that stuff, and everybody bullies me for having spent money on it back in the day.
Oh,
Yeah.
do you want to say how much you've spent on it?
Oh no, I only bought a $48 ship. I'm pretty sure I was never somebody to buy one of the $300, $400
Okay.
ones. Yeah.
Okay, just had to check.
Yeah, no. As a game developer, of course, I'm not making that much money, so I don't really have the money to spend on imaginary ships right now.
Right. Well, one thing you brought up earlier is that you guys do actually have a publisher. So what does a publisher actually do for you? Because I've spoken to some game devs who are doing things entirely on their own. They don't want to have a publisher. They don't want to get involved in that. They just want to do things how they're doing things. But for your team, what does having a publisher do, and why did you guys decide to get involved with a publisher?
So for us, having a publisher means that we can just be exposed to a lot more people across the board. So they do a lot of our marketing for us, and sort of assist us with social media, community management, all that sort of thing. Like recently, I think, actually better still, when we first launched our Steam page, our publisher had a sale on the front page of Steam at the time. So immediately from launch, we were directly on the front page of Steam, which gave us, I think, something like 1,000 wish lists in like the first 48 hours. Which as indie developers, probably never possible without something like that. I guess in the state that we sort of are right now. Yeah, which was amazing to sort of like see that sort of like reach almost immediately. And I guess more recently, with the IGN Summer of Games Festival, our publisher again had like a showcase, and we were featured in that too. So we got a trailer on IGN, and we were on Steam again, and it's just like that stuff is just, I guess, financially locked for so many small developers. Like I don't know how much it cost, but I can't imagine we'd be able to afford it on our own. So on that side of things, they do a lot of work for us, and on the creative side too, they aid us in sort of producing graphic assets for social media, trailers and whatnot. Yeah. So there's a lot of things they do, but not necessarily game development orientated. That's
Right.
all on us.
Yeah, like, well, social media stuff is like one of those things where I see a lot of indie game devs just kind of ignore, or they just let. I guess one thing I really I see with a lot of indie studios is maybe they'll like be active on social media like for a couple months, and then it's radio silent for 3 months, 6 months, and it's like, hey, here's an update for the game, and I get that like the social media stuff is a job unto itself. Actually doing that well, doing that consistently, keeping updates and stuff about the game, like that's also difficult. But I feel like that's one of the areas that a lot of people really just leave on the table. That is, in many ways, like that's for a lot of games now a big part of your marketing. Like if you have some video that goes semi-viral on or like on YouTube, on TikTok even, like that's a big part of getting people to know about the game, and it really needs to be given that sort of attention.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. Like, social media is a full-time job for any team member, and I can't imagine, like working in like a one or two man team where you're trying to make a game, and then 3 days of the week you're doing TikTok posts and
Yeah.
Instagram, Reddit, Facebook, everything else. It is its full-time job, and like, I think for me right now, between me and one other team member, we kind of manage that stuff for us.
Mhm.
But even now, like I know we're probably not doing enough. Like we haven't gotten TikTok yet, which I know we need to. Yeah, and it just feels like you're pushing out these posts, but they're not really reaching enough people
Mhm, mhm,
because we're probably not doing the right thing yet. It's like you throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks,
mhm, mhm.
really. And it's an iterative process. I think, yeah, from when we started posting, I was like my posting style, I guess, on how we make content for the team has changed quite considerably
Mhm,
because some things got more views than others, and it's like, oh, maybe that way of displaying the graphics was more interesting to people.
mhm,
It's like I didn't study, I guess, media and social media science or anything like that.
mhm,
And I guess we're trying as best as we can with it. But a publisher can be a massive help on that regard.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I didn't study it either. I've just winged it this entire time, and I think
Do
that
by learning or
yeah,
learning by
pretty
doing.
much. There's the thing is there's a lot of good resources out there as well. Like it's not like you have to go through formal education to work out how these things work. Like there's so many, like YouTube is a great learning resource for anything that you're unsure at. Like even just, even if you guys don't find an animator, for example, if somebody wants to also pick up more animation skills, like there's so many good resources out there on how to do animation, how different tooling works, like what's the benefit of different tooling, like all of these different things that just weren't really available in this same sort of way even just a couple of years ago.
Oh, but yeah. Yeah, it's like YouTube is just such a massive resource for learning these days. Like I remember when I first started getting into game dev, like if I had questions that I didn't get answered in class, I'd go watch a Bracky's video or a Code Monkey video and
Yeah,
just
yeah.
learn it myself. And yeah, it's open and free for pretty much anybody in the world, which it's even better.
Mhm.
One of the benefits of the internet, I guess, in this day of AI. Oh, these days.
AI is an interesting one that people talk a lot about when it comes to like game dev and stuff. I don't know where that's going to go. Like there's a lot of like legal concerns around it and like IP and all of those sorts of issues. And I really don't know what's actually going to happen. But I think we're going to find some sort of answer within the next 5 or so years. Like
Hmm.
I do think we're in a bubble with it, but I don't think it's going to go away. Like the internet was a bubble back in the late 90s where every company was like, I'm going to be companyname.com, and it's like, okay, but what are you actually doing with the internet? Like what is this actually adding to your product? And that's
Hmm.
what you're seeing right now, whereas a lot of things, there's a lot of like fast food places where it's like fast food with AI. It's like, okay, what are you doing though? Like what is your
Yeah.
product? What are you selling?
Hmm. No, I totally agree with you. It's like it's definitely not going anywhere, and we've got to learn to integrate and work with AI in the best ways possible, the most ethical ways, especially in the games and creative industries. I have tons of friends in the art side of the industry that are like fully against AI. Don't
Mhm.
put their work on certain websites anymore because they're being used in AI sort of networks. And yeah, it's just about, I guess, the larger corporations finding a way to tackle these ethical problems,
Mhm.
so that we can work, I guess, harmoniously with our AI overlords in the next 10 years.
That's certainly a way to put it.
Yeah. If any Google Homes are listening, please don't kill me.
Okay, well let's actually get back to the game itself.
Yeah.
So when you were at Avcon, were there any issues that people brought up with the game that you weren't aware of? That because I'm sure there's a lot of repeats of the same stuff you'd heard, tons and tons of times before. One thing I was surprised about with Avcon this year, like I'm usually the person who, if a game has bugs, I will be the person to find them. And I'm surprised by how little I found at Avcon this year. Like, a lot of the games there were like really, really rock solid, and it was hard to break them.
Yeah, like I think a lot of devs put a lot of effort into like their convention builds being the most stable possible.
Mhm,
And I remember talking to one of the teams that they were like, "Oh, we were up till 5 a.m. fixing all the bugs the night before," and it's like, people really care about this sort of stuff, and
mhm,
being
mhm.
able to showcase a polished piece
Yeah,
of your
yeah.
work is so important. I think in terms of us though, 99% of people didn't encounter a single bug until one man sat down, who now holds all of our highest records in the game, and he sat there for about 2 hours trying to break the game next
Uh-huh.
to Aiden, our QA manager, being like, "Oh, I've managed to get out of the map," and Aiden just goes, "Oh God, I didn't fix that, did I?" So yeah, it's always great to learn
Mhm,
that people are interested to break games, and if they can, you just watch them do it and then find a way to fix it.
mhm. I wish I'd found that one. That was how did do you recall how that happened? Like,
There's so one of the abilities in the game right now is like a charge ability,
oh.
which like pushes you forward and lets you like launch. But you can jump at the same time that it activates, and it'll launch you up into the air. So if you like do what's called like a double jump, which you can actually do by like input canceling with the game as it currently stands, so you can double jump and then launch yourself out of the map. There's some really really interesting scenarios you can get yourself into.
Mhm.
However, to be able to do that is actually really difficult. And like, again, 99.9% of the player base probably wouldn't really ever find that.
Right.
And we were like, you know what, probably not worth investigating fixing, for now at least.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's like that 0.1% of players will find how to break your game and show you up. Uh,
Right, right.
on funny bugs, actually, a couple of months ago, we put out a build when we were at Sage, the South Australian Games Exhibition,
Mhm.
where there was just a barrier, one of the doorways, one of the gates in the garden area of the game. And we realized there was just no collider on it, and you could just walk straight out of the map. And it's like nobody had ever tried, nobody had ever found it, and we
Mhm.
we had no idea. And then somebody was just like, "Yeah, if I just walk straight through," it's
Mhm.
like you
Mhm.
just clip through the metal and you're outside of the map, and no enemy's going to attack you. And I was like, "That's amazing! Thank
Mhm.
you for telling us, Aiden. Get and fix it." But yeah, again, I think all of this too reinforces why QA, quality assurance, is so important with games. Like you can make or break a game's reputation by releasing in a buggy state. Look at something like Cyberpunk or No Man's Sky
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
launched in a bad state, and it took years to sort of build that community reputation sort of back.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're trying our best to do that when we can.
You mentioned Sage there. I completely forgot that this started. Like, this is a really
Yeah,
recent expo.
yeah. So Sage has been around for 2 years,
Mm.
and this year was the second time around. Yeah, it's a really great spot to be at. It's kind of like Avcon, but a little bit smaller. No anime stuff. It's wholly about the games, which is
Mm.
really cool. Ironically, it's actually what got us a publisher in the end. We managed to talk to some people there,
Mhm.
and they got talking to each other, and connections were sort of made.
When was that? When was the event?
It was back in February, and it happens. I
Okay.
believe it's happening every February from now on.
I will have to keep my eye on next year and actually go.
I think as well with Sage, it's like one of those events that really, really showcases even more so than the indie games room because the focus is all on the developers, just how much talent is coming out of South Australia at the minute. And it's really, really great to see that there's so many people studying and working just on creating awesome games.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when people think of like software development in Australia, the first thing people generally think of is Sydney and Melbourne.
Mm.
But because I think a big part of that is because like that's where I think Google had their headquarters or their Australian headquarters in Sydney or Melbourne, one of the two. And a bunch of other tech companies, they had their Australian headquarters in one of those places as well. But they are just so astronomically expensive to live there at this point. Like South Australia is not cheap, but like I think the median house price in Sydney is like 1.5 million, something stupid like that.
It's insane. I
But
recently read a news report that now Australia is more expensive than like London to live in, or Adelaide's more expensive than London, and it's insane to think.
I
But
think
we're all doing it here.
I think the only place more expensive than Sydney is like Hong Kong.
Mm.
But the point I was getting at there is places like South Australia are a lot cheaper. So a lot of people are moving to South Australia. There's a lot of people who, because there's more people here, there's people who are finding other like-minded people who have interest in doing game development. And when people think of like a game that came out of South Australia, like the first thing everyone thinks of is Hollow Knight, of course. And I brought this up in like a recent episode. I'm so sad by when I started going to AvCon. My first year was the year after Hollow Knight was at AvCon.
Mm.
So I missed it.
Yeah.
I just missed it. But like that's not the only thing that we have in this state. Like there are other really cool projects that are here. Like there's Bloodreaver. I've got a card here from Which Way Up. I've got the guys from End of Ember on the other week. There's a bunch of really cool games that are being worked on, and I really hope people start to see like what is actually coming out of this state.
Absolutely. I think over the next few years, it's the dynamics really going to change where we go from the one studio that people talk about, Team Cherry, of course, Hollow Knight, to now we're becoming one of those game dev hubs in Australia that people can really go, Jesus, there's so much going on there.
Yeah. It's exciting, not just like it's exciting for everyone, not just the people who are doing the game development, but for the people playing as well, because it's cool to think like, oh, these are people who, like, with South Australia being such a small place, like, in some cases, like, oh, I went to the same high school as this person who made this really cool game. Like, oh, that's really cool. Or, like, like, Adelaide is a tiny place, right? Like, I will meet someone who's like, oh, I don't know you, but, like, oh, it turns out you were, like, friends with, like, my brother's cousin or something. Oh, hey, like, how does this work? Sure.
2 degrees of separation where you go.
Like
what I like to say.
Like it's I don't know. Like Adelaide's it's a tiny place, but there is a lot of really cool stuff happening here, and I really hope that people start remembering that it exists.
Yeah, it's weird because like I'm originally from the UK. I moved here 9 years ago. I'm not sure you can tell with the accent anymore. But when I was told, I was 15 and I was moving to Adelaide, I was like, what? Never heard of it before. But now, like, I've been to the other major Australian cities, and I always come back to Adelaide being like, this is my home. This is my favorite out of all of them. There's so much to love about this city that people don't at first know, which is great.
Yeah. There's more here than just the mole's balls.
Exactly. You got the pigeons as well, and the pigs.
You have a lot of pigeons, yes. So one of the things I didn't really ask about before was, so you have the core game loop of you go through the rounds, you find the story, you do all this stuff. After you finish a round, like after you finish a run, what happens then?
So we're sort of working on long-term progression mechanics to really sort of get the player to want to play over a period of weeks, period of months, and stuff to earn and craft, you could say, outside of game as well. So something we're working on at the minute is called our relic system, where in runs, you can collect what we're calling, at least internally, schematics for things. You can then exfiltrate, like we talked about earlier, leave the map early or whenever you want, with those schematics to allow you to craft things that you can then bring into subsequent rounds. So that's one thing that we're sort of really looking on how we can drive players to want to sort of play on a more long-term basis. On top of that as well, like unlocking calling cards for your sort of like player profile. Um, there's a bunch of things that we are working on. I think a few I can't talk about just now. But yes, there's definitely stuff we are considering of how do we get people to come back time and time again. Of
Right.
course, with multiple maps as well, playing with your friends, doing the Easter eggs, discovering things on map 3 that you didn't know existed in map 1. We have toyed around with also doing some kind of like challenge mode system, reminiscent of like Halo Skulls, for example. But don't quote me on that if it never appears in the game. We are definitely playing with more mechanics there.
Because that's always one of the reasons why I always went back and did like a couple of runs here and there when I was bored, but I never really got super into doing zombies. Like I like some sort of progression system, like even if it's just like something fairly minor. Like this is like first thing people think of is like a roguelite, like Hades or Dead Cells, where Hades is a great example because you'll upgrade like the amount of health you have, you upgrade your weapons, you upgrade all of this like little things that you don't need to do it. Like it doesn't need to be there. You can get through the entire game without doing that, but it adds something else you can work towards that's not just going through doing the same thing again. Because the other thing that a game like this is going to have is the weapon placement is all going to be in the same location, unless there's some plan to shift stuff around.
So we are actually moving more towards a pseudo mystery box system where only certain weapons will be available on the wall, and there'll be a lot of stuff that you can only get from some kind of random spinner mechanic that involves both weapons and abilities in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I assume there's going to be some sort of like upgrade system, so like it turns into like there's a pack-a-punch sort of system.
Yeah, so we are doing what we call a blood infuser system, where you can upgrade your weapons and your abilities as well. And we're also looking at how we can incorporate in-run perk upgrading, so or packs, should I say, like equivalent perks, where over time you can complete pseudo objectives with each pact, your demonic pact, your passive bonuses, to make them more powerful. And every time you reset, you'd have to do those again, or get a different challenge, sort of thing. So yeah, that progression that happens sort of in game and out of game is something that we're really focusing on to try and make sure there's content for people that want to just play once and want to play for multiple months as well.
So one thing with the weapons is there going to be like some sort of risk reward weapon? Because you think of something like the is it the upgraded ray gun where if you shoot it too close to your feet, you just might die?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you going to have anything like that where it's like really powerful, but if you are stupid with it, you will just ruin your run?
Yeah, so there's definitely lots of different weapon stats that we're able to play with the systems that have been made now. So, like a blowback stat, for example, like, you shoot within a certain range, you inflict damage on yourself.
Yeah.
We're definitely looking into how we can have our range of weapons really be diverse. And of course, as well, our artifact weapons, which are much more demonic in nature, which, you can look at like your wonder weapons, for example. But yeah, we're doing our own stuff with that, which will hopefully introduce some even more cooler mechanics on top of what other games may offer.
I don't know if you want to say this yet, but with your main hand weapon, are you always thinking of it to be some sort of gun? Obviously, there's a crossbow as well, but is the plan to always keep it in that sort of gun sphere, or are there ideas of things outside of just doing guns?
So right now we've got your sort of weapons in one side of your combat system, but now we've actually added in the ability to aim down sight. And then you sort of got abilities on your other hand, but now we've been working on a system that allows you to sort of like put away the guns and your other hand and sort of go into an alternate state, if you will.
Right.
So, like putting your gun down and then sort of like bringing out two swords, for example, or what else can I say? There's a couple things you probably leave to the release window. But yeah, we are planning on having stuff that replaces what's in your hands, to again like reinforce alternate combat styles and like spicing up moment to moment sort of gameplay.
Well, okay, balance is obviously a thing that's very. I don't know how you feel about balance because balance. Some people want their game to be where every weapon is viable. Sometimes you want it to be where there's something where it is a clear upgrade path where, by the time you're in round 30, the basic weapons are just not going to be viable anymore. But like, what are your thoughts on this?
So balancing games is obviously super important. We've got two designers that, towards the end of a project's life cycle, their job is to make sure things are balanced to
Mhm,
what we're sort of trying to go for. But in terms of like balancing all things evenly, it's definitely with a game like this, it's not actually something you want to do.
mhm.
I think for us, like you've played the demo with the crossbow.
Yeah.
The crossbow basically becomes completely useless by round five,
Mhm,
deliberately so it pushes players to go find another weapon. But then if you get to the upgrade mechanics, the blood infuser, that upgraded crossbow becomes incredibly powerful
mhm,
to reinvigorate that and allow it to be used again at higher rounds. Again, with the weapons, like we sort of said before, their damage sort of scales as you upgrade them. But your ability damage works differently. So there's multiple different parts of balancing with that sort of stuff
mhm,
where, you know, weapons will get really good and then fall off until you re-upgrade them. But then when you hit the max tier, it's all about how your abilities can really, or your weapons support your abilities, if you
mhm,
will.
mhm.
Flipping that sort of on its head, where you might consider abilities to be your support things, it's actually more of like your ability is the thing that deals the most damage at higher rounds with Bloodreaver.
Okay, so early on, you don't really have that much access to your
Mm,
abilities because you don't have that many enemies to kill.
yeah,
So it's mainly about the weapon damage. But then as you go further, the weapons are balanced around the content when they should be found. And then
yes, absolutely.
as you go further, the weapons start to fall off and the abilities start to become your main focus, with the weapons being there more to support building up your abilities so you can do the heavy damage.
Yeah, yeah, you're exactly right. So it's like you almost flip the stakes from the early round to the mid rounds to the sort of later rounds as well, which we paid a lot of attention to. I could show you the spreadsheets that went into actually balancing those things to make that happen. And Jackson is an absolute genius when it came to that sort of stuff.
Mhm. I think that's really cool because it might not be immediately evident when a player is trying it, but I feel like they'll get the idea after they start messing around with their abilities and see, like, okay, well, this does a lot of damage here. Well, okay, now it's doing less damage. Like, it's not gonna. Maybe they'll have to go through a couple of runs to work out, like, when that swap really starts to make sense. And obviously, it'll be like a gradual thing as you go through the rounds. It'll be more heavily leaning on the abilities. It wouldn't be like a hard, okay, now ability time.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think that adds some definitely some interesting change to the typical formula you see here.
Yeah, and that's what we really have tried to do, like including stuff about our combat style that separates us from those other games to make people like understand the core mechanics from other games, but then actually interacting with them, especially as they play more and more, it's like, oh, I need to change my playstyle
Mhm, mhm.
to accommodate for the systems in Bloodreaver, as opposed to just playing the game like you would another wave shooter.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
and there was definitely a deliberate decision around that.
Mhm, mhm. Hmm. I'm curious to see how that would feel at the higher rounds. Then
Hmm.
I'm yeah maybe how much of the higher round stuff is there in the current demo that's available?
So the game sort of just goes infinitely with the current
I
demo.
mean, like
So
as content. At what point is content no longer being added? Like, at what point have you found all the demons that are going to be added into it?
So in the demo right now, there's the two demons. The second
Oh,
one
okay.
appears at round five, and once you've unlocked the whole sort of space of the map and done the three rituals around the map, which you can do by sort of round 10, that
Mhm.
is effectively what you could call like you've seen all the content.
Right.
But it is playable for as long as you can survive for.
Mhm.
Yeah, and with the sort of ritual system that we've got in the game that lets you unlock the blood infuser, it's almost like pushing you to do those early on to make them easy for yourself because two of those rituals take place in really small spaces. Doing them at later rounds when demons have hundreds and hundreds of health means that they get super difficult. But yeah, content sort of you stop seeing new stuff necessarily around round 10, but we're trying to push that further and further back with the new versions of the game, especially when you start including Easter eggs, which might take 20, 30 rounds to do, especially on a first try sort of thing.
Mhm. So when everything is ready, like what is there like a point that is decided right now for like where the end of the map should be roughly placed?
In terms of when you exfiltrate, we're sort of like working on, I guess, balancing those numbers. Like, I think we've been discussing recently on being like, it shouldn't even appear till round 25, for example, or, it appears at that round and then there's a window that you can use it, then it appears again at a later window. That's all stuff that we'll be working on over a
Mhm.
longer period of time. I can't really give really an answer there, but in terms of like replayability, I think with the way that the sort of abilities are now constructed, somebody could have an entirely different experience with the ability system and the weapon system each time they sort of play,
Mhm.
based on how they build their sort of character.
So are there discussions internally about how difficulty difficulty scale difficulty scaling should work? Like, is it supposed to be a linear line of difficulty upwards? Is it supposed to be, okay, it's a fairly flat difficulty, hey, you get to round 5, spikes up a bit, then spikes up, and like 5, 10 rounds later, and spikes up? Like, what's the intended goal here?
So with difficulty, it is intentionally quite curated.
Mhm.
So like we sort of said, you've got that sort of linear difficulty to around round 5, and then it really spikes. And we do that at certain points to really sort of push people to get better, and almost like you have that point, the separator points we like to call them, where
Mhm.
you might place and relax, I guess, for a few rounds from rounds 18 to maybe 21, but then 22 is like, oh, things have gotten much harder, and there's that distinct sort of step
Mhm. Mhm.
up until a point, of course, and then it just becomes exponential um, with that, because you want to make a system that goes on forever,
Mhm.
but curating for the first 50, 60, 70 rounds, I think, is something that we have been doing already.
Mhm. How long does a round go for? And then how long would it take to get to like round 30 or so? Assuming that you're doing things in a relatively,
Mhm.
not, perfectly optimal, but playing at a pace that you sort of intend things to be done.
I would imagine so. It's all based on, so each round has a certain amount of demons that,
Right.
that are in it, and that increases each round. So the more demons that spawn, the more you have to kill, and their health also increases over time too.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I imagine to get to round 30 at a semi-optimal level, you're probably playing for around an hour, maybe an hour and a half.
Mhm.
Realistically, it could be longer, it could be less, depending on how you're sort of going about upgrading and doing the rituals and whatnot.
Mhm. Because that's always a concern I think about with roguelike games, where something like Hades has it fairly well tuned, where even if you're not that great at the game, like a full run takes 20, 25 minutes, maybe 30 minutes if you're a bit slower. Then there are some other games, where, like Dead Cells, where it might take like 40, 45 minutes. And with a game, it can start to get fairly tiring, especially if you are dying in the later rounds. If the systems take too long to get back up to the later rounds, especially if in this case there are things that you want to do at the later rounds, like maybe you have that exfiltration there, maybe you have story elements that can't be done to those later rounds. So I do think it is worth definitely considering how long you intend for things to take, because if it's too long, you get to a point where hardly anyone's going to want to get to that point, because like, okay, well, you don't want people to start feeling like it's become a drag and they've exhausted the content. They just want it to be over.
No, absolutely. I totally agree with you. It's definitely a hard balancing act to know when to, excuse me, gate the player from certain things. And I
Mhm.
think with like Easter eggs and narrative and all that stuff, I think our philosophy is that you can do it or you can start to do it from round one. But realistically, just of like how those things progress, it might take you all around the map. Those things take time to sort of unlock.
Mhm. Mhm.
And yeah, like naturally, we're sort of aiming for a certain point or round point or time limit where you should, if you're trying to do an Easter egg, it should take you. Again, I don't have the exact numbers for those things, but we are definitely looking into how we can make sure that those goals are achievable within a reasonable amount of time. But then,
Right.
looking at some other games, you might have Easter eggs that take an hour, or if you're doing them for the first time, it might take 3 hours because you've got to go back and find different steps that you had no idea existed.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of discovery, though, like if you were a player that knew exactly what you're doing, 45 minutes to an hour realistically could be a time frame that we looked at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, again, no promises there. It might be longer if that's what people want, and that's what we discover.
Well, yeah, I don't think, considering how early it still is in the development, they would have like a set time at this point. But I do think it is at least worth keeping in mind and making sure, it's not just something you just let go on, just let happen whatever happens, basically.
Yeah. No, anything that we do in that regard would definitely be curated and tested extensively to make sure that we're not going too far or too short with that sort of thing.
So you mentioned having different, and maybe this is starting to get into like character design scope creep. You mentioned having different demon designs around like the base demon. Is there going to be different designs around the different maps, or are there going to be the same sorts of variations between the maps?
So, trying to think about what I can say. With the base horde, we
Mhm.
want to, at least in the first few maps, keep some level of consistency. And the enemies that we introduce, if there's a special type of demon, that design language stays quite consistent. But then later on, you might see a slightly different variant of that demon specific to that map that has mechanics that are tailored towards the space that it might be in. And it's almost a progression of something you might have seen before, if you will.
So would you have demons that are like potentially exclusive to a certain map?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are actually currently in the process of making the first mini boss, which specifically appears on one of the maps we're working on right now.
Mhm.
There are others planned for the beginning of the end, which is the cathedral map.
Mhm.
Every map will include at least one enemy type that is specific to it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's the plan.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Just a matter of coming up with ideas for it, I guess, and making them different enough where it doesn't feel like you're just fighting the same thing. It just looks a little different.
Yeah, so like actually coming up with diverse mechanics for enemies can be really interesting because there's only so many times you can do an enemy that runs up and hits you.
Mhm.
And yeah, coming up with systems and making a robust framework for systems where you can do a lot of that stuff without relatively too much work internally is
Mhm.
something that we are doing right now, where a lot of that stuff is based off a certain framework, and we can sort of attach a bunch of things together, and it just, as Todd Towers said, it just works. But yeah, no, like attention to mechanical variety, I think is super important in enemy types for a game like this.
Mhm. So, one of the things that a lot of games get wrong is making it so you can see what is happening. I think at this point, Bloodreaver is fairly clean with like the effects that are going on. You know, like there's some games where there'll be just like bright colors going everywhere. It's like I can't see anything. Like what is happening? But you have mentioned like reworking animations, and I assume that's gonna like be reworking maybe like effects that happen with things as well.
Every animation, every effect,
Animation.
it's all getting reworked. Yeah.
But I do think it's very important to keep in mind like the visual clarity. Like a game I play a lot of is Path of Exile, and when you're at high levels of Path of Exile, what is visual clarity? Like there's certain builds
Yeah.
where the gimmick of the build is you cannot see what is happening on the screen. Like it is just like, everything's dying instantly. It doesn't matter, but you
Yeah.
cannot see what's happening. So
No, I played a bit of PoE in the past. Not even I never maxed my characters, but yeah, even getting to the point where there's just particles everywhere.
yeah, yeah.
It is definitely a consideration for a game like this we have. And yeah, visual clarity so the player understands what they're looking at, across enemies, across your abilities and your weapons. It's a big point with FPS games specifically.
Well, not just visual clarity with like the enemies, but visual clarity to explain what's happening to the player. Because you mentioned things like maybe like an effect that'll slow down the player. Having some way to indicate to the player that that is actually going on, that they can quickly understand, because slowdown's a fairly easy one to see because, you know, you're moving slower, but understanding why you're moving slower, understanding how to get out of moving slower, and other effects that might not be as obvious where, I don't know, maybe the enemies do more damage to you or something like it's not instantly visual.
Yeah, so like for example, enemies doing more damage. How do you indicate that one enemy of the same class is more powerful than the other? It's definitely a design challenge that we are facing all the time, and we're looking into the best solutions for. I think other games, for example, you know, you've got enemy A, enemy B. One has glowing red eyes. You think he's probably doing more damage for you, but it's much more nuanced than that. I think when it actually comes down to like the development of those sort of things. But it is a massive consideration of on our part for how we go about doing things.
Going back to what I was saying about PoE, like, there are points where you have like 12 different icons in your top left corner. It's like, okay, if you've played the game 1,000 hours, you know what those icons mean, but it's not instantly obvious what some of them might indicate.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned icon design. Actually, it's something that we did a bunch of iterations on with the itch version of the game right now, the demo. For the abilities and the packed icons, like how do you get across? I think uh, more health to the player, and how do you have a naming convention that makes the player walk up to something, see an icon, and then see a name of something, and instantly know exactly what you're getting from that.
Right.
And we went through so many iterations for that stuff, and I think one thing that we really sort of went down to is like, are you world building with this thing, or are you gamifying it? And where is the line in between there that works for the type of game that you're sort of making? And we ended up somewhere right in the middle, slightly towards world building, but on the sort of side of gamification at the same time. That's so important, like to have a good UX and UI designer involved in a project that can accurately get across information in a visual format immediately to a player. Oh, it's a big difference in projects, I've noticed.
Yeah, immersion is great and all, but if immersion is getting in the way of the player knowing what's happening, like, I know there are games where like immersion is their core focus, but with a game like this where it's about high-speed gameplay, like, you don't really have time to be immersed every second of the thing. You know, immersed in the individual element that's on the wall. Like, you've got demons right behind you. Like, you need like to be able to understand what's happening straight away, and yeah.
No, I totally agree. We went through it multiple times of you know, what was too much, what was too little, what wasn't clear, and what was. We ended up for this version at least adding like a notification system just to make it abundantly clear what you were getting when you bought certain things. Yeah, I think now internally we're seeing how we can do the identification of that stuff better to not need that. But yeah, it's definitely a massive thing in games to be able to get the player to understand, especially in a high-paced environment, what information is being given to you at any particular time, especially with like buying a weapon, buying an ability or a perk or whatever. It's yeah,
Like
it's
with health,
consideration to say the least.
like with health, for example, like a thing you'll commonly see in games is you pick up the health, your screen goes a shade of green, and there'll be some like some happy sound effect that indicates your health has gone up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also like you mentioned sound effects. It's not also visual; it's auditory, and then it's effect based as well. And there's so many things in terms of getting information across to a player. And then if you really want to get down to it, it's like, how do you consider accessibility with something like that? Like, does it still work even if one of those senses is cut off? Like, say you've got the game on mute. Do you still understand the thing in the same way? There's so many factors to consider with that stuff.
Well, what thought has gone into accessibility? Because that's one of the areas where games have traditionally been fairly lacking. My favorite one is a game. It'll have a colorblind setting, and it doesn't indicate the kind of colorblindness. It's just colorblind. Like, okay, thank you, I guess. Like, that's not very useful. But there's a lot more. Like Dead Cells, I keep going back to Dead Cells. Dead Cells is such a great example of this, where they effectively added like what amounts to a cheat menu in the game, where you can turn off basic things in the game that just for someone who might have limited mobility, just they would not be able to play with it whatsoever. Or they have, I'm pretty sure they have very clear color blindness modes, and there's a bunch of other really cool stuff in it. And a lot of games have been really exploring this path a lot more than was traditionally done. I do think it's really cool, but I know it's also really challenging and adds a whole nother vector of game design that maybe you don't have the expertise to properly address either.
I think for us, it's definitely like trying to reach a larger audience. You know, you want to have your game to be accessible as possible with the biggest amount of people there is. So I think the first thing we really did was look at other FPS games and see what accessibility settings they offered to be like, okay, that's a standard, that's something that we can do. So like, you know, controller input maps, being able to rebind your controls, having like templates for all of that stuff that have like presets.
The thing that always annoys me is when a game has keyboard rebinding and not controller rebinding.
Exactly. So you have to have both of those things, and like being able to be on the PC and also use a controller. Yeah, like all of those things are standard, and we're doing at the moment. In terms of colorblind settings, like you said, like including specific types of colorblindness as profiles that you can overlay over the game, and we're developing a system for that quite easily at the minute, where you can basically overlay the different like shades that you need to push.
Yeah, I imagine that's a fairly well explained thing with game design at this point, because it is, from my understanding, would just be changing the color, like basically putting a filter over the game.
Yeah, it's called a post-processing effect over the top. And from my understanding, there's just like a bunch of profiles you can get off the internet that do exactly what you need to do. So you don't even need to set it up yourself. It's just about creating the interface to be able to flip between those things. Yeah, in terms of accessibility as well, we are working on a localization system, something that our publisher is supporting us to do, to get those languages, or again, translated, you could say. But having an interaction system and a text system within the game that is made with localization in mind from the get-go, so we don't end up ripping out everything we've done in 2 years' time to make a system be able to do that. We do it from the start, so we don't have to do that later. Yeah, that's one factor that we've really taken into account. Yeah, in terms of like auditory stuff as well, you know, having settings for dialogue, so character doesn't, or a player doesn't need to have their audio on, for example, or if somebody's deaf. Again, like including as many people as possible in this type of game, I think is the best thing we can do. Yeah, and it's definitely a factor that we're trying to address as best we can, even as a small indie studio.
Yeah, like another thing that always annoys me when games don't have separate audio sliders. Where it's like, okay, they have the sound effects way too loud, and for whatever reason, sound effects and voice acting are in the same setting. Like, okay, can you not do that, please? Like, I get it, it's challenging, and if you don't build your sound system around that, it might be difficult to add in after the fact, but yeah.
I would actually argue in Unity, they make creating like sound distribution and separating all your sound into different, I guess, groups quite easy. So it's something that we're already doing, and naturally, well, we've got like six or so different sliders for your sound settings. So yeah, like I hear you there. There's definitely a bunch of games that just combine a bunch of things into the same layer.
Especially if you go back to older games, like PS2 games, for example, like like master volume. Like, okay, I can turn down my thing. I don't need that. No, that's definitely good that you guys are considering that as well. As I said though, like it's a whole nother vector of stuff that needs to be considered then, and it's just I understand why a lot of developers don't put much focus on it, because it's really important, but it's really important for such a small group of players that I can understand why in a lot of cases it does get left by the wayside, or if it does get some support, it'll be like a fairly minimal level of support.
Yeah, I think with like language support specifically, if any developer can support or have any form of accessibility, it's like languages just bring your game to a whole other audience that you might not even know exists. I think one thing that gets talked about quite a lot in the industry is the Brazilian market
Mhm.
and the South American markets. They are huge,
Yeah, yeah.
and a lot of games never localize to any of those spaces, and those players just can't play because they either don't speak English or don't have the option to be able to purchase those games on their storefronts. And for us, it's like if we can tap into that, that's maybe 10, 15,000 people additionally that might play the game,
Mhm.
and might be able to enjoy it as well. So yeah, it's just while it shouldn't be something that indie developers go, no, we have to have accessibility everywhere. It's like there are reasons to focus on that, and where you can, you might as well bake it into your core systems early in development, as opposed to, oh, 3 years in, we're going to do all of these things, and we need to break everything to make it work.
I don't know what Unity provides in regards to this, but when you're dealing with translation, there's also issues with right to left languages instead of left to right languages. Like if you build all your UI systems around English and then you want to support Arabic, good luck. Have fun with that.
It's really funny you mentioned that actually, because our programmer who's worked on all of our localization systems, we did a bunch of research onto exactly how other games have done that, and
Mhm.
conjunctive sentence structure for how different languages are constructed. You can't just have like hold B to do the thing for X cost. That's fine in English, but then in something like German or Russian, those things are swapped around. It's like um, do the thing button, and then cost is over here and then something else at the end, and then flipping that around for something like Arabic. It's you've got to come up with a robust structure
Mhm.
that in the end is actually Excel based, once again with spreadsheets, to allow you to sort of include all these additional languages with all of their different structures and how they sort of make sentences.
Mhm.
It's it's definitely an endeavor, but it's such a worthwhile one. I think we've put the right time into that
Mhm.
for sure.
So I know you guys are on Steam, but is Steam the only platform you guys are currently targeting? Or I guess
So
PC.
Steam is obviously the primary target on the PC platform. We are looking to port to consoles. That is something that,
Okay.
as we get further in development, I've got some connections through various platforms that we'll be looking into alongside our publisher.
Mhm.
In terms of the PC market as well, though, we'll be on a bunch of different storefronts. I know our publisher said that they'll put us on upwards of I can't remember exactly how many platforms, but it will be everywhere.
Mhm.
Yeah. Console support though is definitely something we're considering.
Okay. Because I know that's a whole nother once again a whole nother vector to support, and I know Unity has has tooling in there to do it, but there's gonna be changes that need to happen around it being. Obviously, you have the controller support there, so that's the
Mm,
easy part.
yeah.
But dealing with the differences between the two consoles, I guess I don't know if you'd want to support Switch. We'll just is that a consideration, or is it just PlayStation, Xbox?
I think for us, Switch is probably not the target market and the
Okay,
target demographic for a game like this. We've done a bit of research, and it's the general audience for a Switch player base is probably not where most of our players lie. And if somebody does own a Switch, they probably also own either a PC, an Xbox, or a
well, fair
PlayStation.
enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, with the PlayStation, Xbox, there's going to be specific things you need to change for those versions of the game.
Mm.
Then they also have different ways that they handle getting updates out to players as well, and having to deal with that problem.
Mm.
A lot of developers jump on saying we need to do console support very early. Like, there was a lot of people at Avcon being like, we're going to be on PC and we're going to be on Switch. Like, okay, good, but release a game first. Like, get a
Yeah.
game done. I know it's exciting. You want to be on everything, but like, release a game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, PC is obviously the target platform and
Right.
our initial release platform. I'm assuming, like for early access, that is, I'd love to be able to say with a full release launch, that'll be on multiple platforms. We do obviously have the publisher that can actually handle our porting solutions all for us
Mm-hmm.
and give us a lot of support there, which makes it more likely we'll be able to hit those goals.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely something that I personally haven't experienced doing before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's something we're aspiring to be able to do over the next few years. Whether it happens at launch or shortly after with DLC one, who knows?
Well, one of the things that well, one of the things that is more interesting nowadays is the idea of also supporting things like the Steam Deck as well. And the Steam, like, I play all my games under Linux. I have the system we're going on right now is running on Arch Linux. It is kind of broken in some cases, but it works most of the time. And I've got a Steam Deck sitting on the shelf right back there.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. It was sent to me as a review unit like a year or so back. I'm not big on playing shooters on a controller, so I probably wouldn't play it on that. But Linux support is weird because it mostly just works, and nowadays has gotten a lot better. But there are some weird things that games do that cause issues, and I don't know if anyone in the team has any interest in making sure that stuff works fine. I don't know what the process is to being like Steam Deck verified or marked as Steam Deck compatible. I'm not really sure how that's done, or if any of you guys have looked into doing that so far.
I know you can submit for Steam Deck support via Steamworks. I know that that's definitely something you can do. I, again, personally haven't used a Steam Deck before, or really Linux either. So that's not my area of expertise within the team, but I'm sure our lead programmer probably has a much better idea than I would on that sort of stuff.
Because nowadays, there's sort of like two main issues with supporting Linux, and that's games that are using anti-cheat, where they just... A lot of the major anti-cheat systems like BattleEye and EAC, they do have Linux support, but a lot of them don't enable the checkbox to enable the Linux support, so it just doesn't work. And the other thing is weird esoteric formats for cutscenes. Those are usually the two things that end up breaking games. Like, I was playing through the DMC HD trilogy, and none of the cutscenes play. It starts the cutscene, instantly skips it. Because it's using some like weird old format that I guess just doesn't have proper support for the encoder. But those are the main things. Actually, that's a good question. Are you guys thinking of doing... I know it's a co-op game, so it's maybe not like a really big concern, but are you guys thinking of doing any sort of anti-cheat?
I think we actually had a chat recently with the programming team about how we're going to sort of combat that sort of stuff. Because especially if you're getting materials in a run that you can bring out for long-term progression, there needs to be some kind of verification system between online and offline play. It's definitely something that we are looking at. Again, that's a big programmer question that is way above goes way over my head. So I would ask them. But yeah, I believe it's definitely something we're considering at the minute.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair. Because I know some co-op games, some co-op games decide to do it. Then there's other games where they probably should have it, like MMOs that, like Final Fantasy 14 doesn't have anti-cheat, so they don't. When you don't have anti-cheat in an MMO, you get some fun things like, hey, we're going to. Like one thing people do in that game a lot is they fish under the map so people can't report them because you can't click on them.
Oh, yeah.
Or they'll fight a boss floating above the boss, things like that.
It actually surprises me with like a big studio like Square Enix, isn't that the developer?
Yeah.
Yeah, that they wouldn't include that sort of thing.
I don't know.
With such a big team.
I don't know why they don't. They have fairly strong like game mods. They actually have like employed game mods who they're supposed to keep that stuff in check, and they do a relatively good job, but a lot of things do slip through the cracks. And then there's games like Path of Exile, which I have no idea how it gets by having no anti-cheat. I don't know what they're doing to keep that in line, because that's like the whole economy is based around player items that there's no anti-cheat to stop people doing. So I don't know what they're doing that makes that all work.
Hopefully it gets fixed with PoE 2, which I'm very excited to play when it comes out.
Yeah, big thing for me is that WASD movement. I've gotten used to the click to move, but I really am very happy to see ARPGs going down the route of having WASD. It's just nicer to play. It feels much easier.
going back to what we said before, just about accessibility options,
Mhm.
having the option to do both, and then a player can make the choice for
Right.
themselves, like
Right.
having adjustable HUD options, turning off the information you don't want to see, or like disabling particle effects in something like PoE.
Mhm.
It's just putting the power in the player's hand to have the experience that they want is so important.
Actually, regarding HUD customization, what are you guys thinking of doing with that? Is it just going to be like HUD scaling, or is there anything else you guys are thinking?
So there will be scaling. There will be certain bits of information you can turn off and on. Again, we're sort of going with what we think is right for the community and what we sort of learned. So
Mhm.
there isn't going to be some sort of like toggleable objective system or anything like that. It'll be more just like, do you want your gun name displayed all the time, some of the time, or not at all, sort of thing. And yeah, like keeping the user interface designed very much around streamers like yourself, for example, so you can have your profile in the top left and then it not be covered by anything else.
Mhm. Mhm.
Keeping all the information in sort of the bottom third of the screen,
Mhm.
something that we're definitely sort of baking into our process. And yeah, making sure that stuff's customizable as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Awesome. Um, is there anything else in here I haven't talked about yet? Um, how long at this point has the game been in development for?
So the prototype you've seen right now, that
Mhm.
was made over 4 months.
Mhm.
I know it's pretty nuts that we managed to push the team that hard to get it done. But this entire year, we worked on setting up our studio, and we've been working on the game as our sort of multiplayer rework since then. So
Mhm.
we've been in full development for probably about four, because company sort of structure takes a few months to sort of work out. But
Right.
yeah, 4 months, I guess, now is where we're at on the reworked side of things.
Mhm.
And then
Okay.
we're looking again to release September next year in early access.
Awesome. Okay. Well, before we end it off, if if someone was thinking of what this game is, like how, why am I so bad at speaking? We tried that again. Let me think before I speak. If you were to describe this game with, let's say, two games that you've played in the past, how would you describe it?
I'll go three games
Okay, three
first,
games,
right?
sure.
I think you could say it's almost as if COD Zombies, Doom, and Bloodborne had a baby, and then it became Bloodreaver. I think that's the best way you can sort of describe the game.
Awesome. Okay, well, let people know where they can find information about the game, where they can get involved in any community you might have.
Mhm.
Do you guys have a Discord server?
We actually do. Yeah, we've got a community Discord server, and I'm sure you'll be able to link that somewhere in some kind of description somewhere.
Yep.
But yeah, we've got our website, hellbytestudios.com, just for more sort of company orientated stuff. The game's obviously available to be wishlisted via Steam. Just type in Bloodreaver, you'll be able to find it. All of our social medias are similarly tagged as well. You can find us on all of them: X, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit as well. We recently launched a subreddit, which we're trying to start growing a community on too. But yeah, our Discord as well is popping. We're trying to build a dedicated, loyal little fanboy base to start playing the game with ourselves. So, yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you want to mention, or is that pretty much gonna be it?
No, that's great. This has been such a great opportunity, Brody. I'm really keen that you had me on here. It's
Yeah,
been
absolute
been great
pleasure.
to talk to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
as I said, I really like this game. I think it's really cool. There is a lot of games on my infinitely growing list of games that I want to play. So whether or not I'll get much time to check it out is another question entirely. But I'll definitely keep an eye on this. And
Mhm,
when it comes out, I definitely am gonna hopefully give it a shot when it hits
mhm.
early access. And yeah, do you
Yeah.
guys have
I'll
any
see if I can sort you out with the key when the release sort of comes around.
Awesome. Do you guys have any plans to show off the game at any upcoming events or?
Yep. So in October this year, we'll be in PAX in Melbourne, and then directly after that will be at Sydney South by Southwest. From there, we'll be at a bunch of events next year, both nationally and internationally through the publisher. Yeah,
Awesome. Sweet. Um. Okay. So nothing else you want to direct people to? Is that pretty much everything then?
yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much again. I
Awesome.
guess we'll leave it there.
I'll do my outro and then we'll leave it there. So my main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. Check that out and you will find maybe something that is interesting. I've got my gaming channel, Brody on Games. I stream there twice a week. Right now, I'm probably still playing through Devil May Cry 4. Very fun game. Highly recommend it. And Metal Wolf Chaos XD, which is a mech game that From Software made back in 2004 that got a re-release. You play as the American president who, for some reason, is piloting a mech and wants to save America. It's a game that exists. It's really stupid. And yeah. If you're listening to the audio version of this, you can find the video version on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. If you want to find the audio, it is on any audio podcast platform. Once again, Tech Over Tea. There is an RSS feed, so put it into your favorite app and you'll be good to go. I will give you the final word. What do you want to say?
Thanks for having me on here. Wishlist Bloodreaver on Steam.
Absolutely. See you guys later.